Continuing my series on UV mapping the Vega interior, I'm actually going to start texturing now, so it's not really UV mapping anymore. So I have to find a good upholstery color that's authentic for the time period, and I ended up compromising on the darker tan there, which is probably more authentic for earlier in the decade, and I'm trying to do a 1971 Vega here. So, first of all, I merged the label layer into one layer, because as I said in the previous tutorial, text layers are always separate in GIMP unless you deliberately merge them into the lower layer or some other layer. And the upholstery will be its own layer. I just created a layer and I'm now filling the areas over the places on the UV map where I'm going to want upholstery. And that's largely the point of having a UV layout file, because this is what you can do. You can basically trace over it, or in this case just put textures over it. Very simple. This stage of the texturing is one of the easiest. So there I put another layer for black plastic, which means basically the dashboard and steering column and so on. And of course in real life not all of those parts were plastic, but they were black. So that makes it easier. I'm choosing a slightly grayish black because if you choose pure black as a texture, some games will interpret that as transparency. So this just tries to head off future problems. And in real life, of course, most black interiors and interior parts are a little bit faded anyway. So there's the steering column, which is mostly black, so that'll get the black treatment. And then the console, which is black. You'll see in a minute that, or a few minutes, that I'll make a mistake on this. And the handbrake, which is also black. Although obviously not all plastic, because it had to be strong enough. Now, if you notice, the gear shift was spaced too closely together, so I had to go back into Blender to spread the parts out a little bit. So I'm going to do something similar with the directional switch there, basically making it bigger. The scale tool. Probably not to scale anymore now that I'm doing this, but at least I can texture it properly now. There's the end of it. And moving it into a convenient position there. And the ignition switch, I figured I should figure out exactly where that is, because I realized I didn't actually know that. So there's the end where the key would theoretically go in. I'm not going to detail that in great detail. I'm not going to detail it very much. And that sliver of UV map apparently belongs in the dashboard, because I missed this slot here. See that? So I got to move that in there, make sure nothing overlaps, and that old mystery is now solved. Notice that you have to use that translate button when you move vertices on the UV map. You can't just use the arrows and so on like in the 3D view. And then I save that new layout because that's now necessary to have in my texture file. So as before, opacity 1.00, resolution 2048 by 2048 pixels. And we go back to GIMP. But first we have to make a new working copy of the XCF file, just in case I've made a mistake. This is a good rule generally. Whenever you do any major change, you want to work on a new version of the file. Keep the old one as backup. There's the UV layout file, the new one. I'll fill it in with white, following my old discovery to avoid the black background. And I'll select all of it, copy, clear the old UV layout from the texture, and paste the new one in. And then anchor the layer. That's an important step to remember. It's easy to forget. And next I'm going to do the directional switch, labeling it first. I'll label the ignition also. Here I'm using the default 18 points because I don't have a lot of room to work. Then black knob on the gear shift. Well, this is an automatic transmission actually. Black knob on the directional switch, just like on my Pontiac actually. Then I have to make a new layer for the silver parts, or the chromed parts. I'm just saying silver fixtures, even though that's not really accurate. They're neither silver nor are they all fixtures, but chrome, let's say. So I use 205, 205, 205 for my chrome setting. You can use whatever you think works best for you. And of course, environment mapping is much better for doing chrome, or just a flat-out photograph, than what I'm doing here. I'm taking a shortcut, essentially. Of course, I almost forgot the gear shift shaft. Those days they were usually chromed. Then I realized that because of all my textures, I was pushing the labels under them, so you couldn't read them well, so I pulled the labels out. Here I'm going to jump way ahead, because this was tedious, and it will push the video up to over 10 minutes if I keep it at full length. So anyway, I got rid of the transparency to make a Targa file, which will be the first test texture, if you will. This is basically for fitting on the model. So here I load it in Blender. That's what it looks like. Go to the 3D view. Then I have to tell it to display the textures. And then you see my mistake there. The back of the console is still tan. That's because I forgot that it was part of the floor. So here I'm going back to GIMP to put that black texture in the floor, remembering, of course, that it should be in the black plastic layer. It's an easy thing to forget if you're in a hurry. And I'm using the free select because it's not a perfect rectangle or circle or anything like that. And as you'll see, I'll have to touch this up a little bit too. So there it is, but I'm not done. I have to, first of all, fix the color because the color was full black and not my dark gray that I wanted. So I'm going to reduce my brush size to 10 points and then touch up with the pencil tool, I guess you'd call it. It's not really the paintbrush tool, even though they're almost the same. Then I clean it up a little more with the eraser. And that is close enough. You're not going to look very much at that in most of the games that you would use this in. As I've said, the interior in its present design is not meant to be interactive. It would need a lot more detail to be that. So, save the new texture. Again, as a Targa, go back to Blender and load it up. And then 3D view, and the console is the correct color. So that's it. Thanks for watching.